Not really loud. Once made this shot, it got beats. You know, when you turn the light on, they glow up in the dark.
The history of the Mishnah. Oh, good evening, David, Ben. How are you doing?
Yeah, very good, thank you.
Running a bit late. Right. We're up to the Gemara Daf Nun Gimel Amud Aleph. 7 lines from the top. We said that on Shemitah, you're allowed to eat produce as long as there's some left in the field. What the Gemara now does is tells us the last place to get the produce from. That means, let's say you live in Yehuda. Where's the last place in Yehuda? You live in the Golel, etc. You're allowed to eat grapes at Shiur. There was a town there called Oichel. When the vines in that place were finished, you can be sure there'll be none anywhere else, because that's where most of the grapes grew. But if you actually knew that there was some grapes growing later, then you can carry on eating. But normally speaking, Oichel would be the last place. You can eat olives. Anybody know what Gush Cholov is? Which Shevet? You hear Teva B'Shem Maglo. You hear it on Zos HaBrochos so many times. Teva B'Shem Maglo. Where does it go? Losh. No, anyway, yeah, it gets a Teva B'Shem in the Shevet of Osher. They had a tremendous amount of oil. Kitza, either in Tekoa and Gush Cholov, even nowadays, if you go to Tekoa, it's a place where they've got old olive trees. So it's a question: where's the last olive trees added in Tekoa and Gush Cholov? And the Beis continues, how much has to be left? Let's say there's one olive left on the tree. That's not enough. You can't find a roiva. So roiva, how much is a roiva? Yeah, roiva means a quarter. Roiva of what? Well, I made it short. Where's the roiva? Here it is. It's page. I didn't put page numbers in it. Here, roiva. Sorry, every time I turn a page to one. Oh, roiva is roiva halug, which is the equivalent of 6 beitzim, which is the equivalent of nowadays, according to Chazal, 600 milliliters, because Chazal 350 milliliters. So that's how much there has to be left in order to continue eating your olives. You're allowed to eat dried figs until the Page Beis Hini are finished. Now, Page Beis Hini were figs that grew in a place called Beis Hini. They were renowned infamously for being of very inferior quality. Because they were inferior quality, they got consumed last. So the Brisa says, as long as those figs in Beis Hini are growing, you can carry on eating your figs. Why? Because there's figs left on. Why would you rely on that place? Because there was a place where it will be less. Says the Gemara, Omar Rabbi Yehuda, I don't agree. Since the inferior in another place where there's proper figs growing. Oh, we see that sometimes the Mishnah mentions them as a place where figs grow. He says it's mentioned that the reason they're mentioned is only to tell you that there's still a chayav in Maisa, even though they are inferior quality. So therefore, it's not telling you that you can rely on them for Shemitah. For Shemitah, you can't. But that if you were to grow them, you would still have to take Tumas HaMaisas. They were never mentioned as relying on them for Shemitah. And in the Maisa, the Tans, Nanya, Page Beisini, Vahina de Tuvina, the figs of Beisina and the dates of Tuvina, Chayav b'Maisa, Chayav b'Maisa, meaning that they're Chayav Tumas HaMaisas, even though they're inferior quality, but not that you can rely on them for Shemitah. So we've got quite a few arguments already. One argument is, where did the olives finish last? This first time it's discussed as why it's not a technical question. And another argument is, can you rely on Page Beis Hini, even though Page Beis Hini were inferior quality? The 2 dots over here are mistake. If you have a Gemara which has 2 dots now, you should miss them out. Because, give it back. Because the Brisa, you sue the seller who sold it to you. The Brisa continues. Oichlin b'tzimom, you can eat dates ashich le'achon shebetzoya, until the last one in soya. Shugam lo'noim oichlin ashabim kippin, but ein oichlin ashbin ashitzin. Does anybody remember what kippin and shitzin are? Kippin are the branches, shitzin are the thorns. So Shugam says you can only eat while there's still dates on the branches, not on the thorns. And Kama says you can eat for either. It's the third machlokas in Shemitah. So Beis, the Mishnah, the Beis concluded to us the halachas of how long you're allowed to eat. So if next time you go to a Sunday of Shemitah and you want to eat dates, what would you do? You'll go to Tsoya and you'll see are there any dates left in Tsoya. That's what you'll do. He gives us dates, not places. It's a contradiction. Do we go after dates or do we go after places? Let's see the Beis inside properly. Till Pesach. Bezeisim ad Atzeres. Begroigos ad Chanukah. B'tmom ad Purim. It gives us dates, not places. The Yehuda swapped the last two, meaning that Chanukah was for dates and Purim was for figs. But we have four different produce, and instead of being told the names of the places where they're finished, what are we told? Times. Answers the Gemara, Idi ve'idi chad shi'urahu, it's one same measure. That means one Beis is telling us how to work it out by the date. The other Beis is telling us by the place where they would run out, but they actually would occur at the same time. If you would go to Tzoya, the dates would run out. When would the dates run out in Tzoya? Either Purim or Chanukah, depending on the last two opinions. V'iboi sema. The first Beis taught us the previous Beis gave us the normal year. Every so often it would be even later ones. And that Beis is telling us that you can rely on them if they are later. Says this is an interesting halach. If it is true, you can always rely on later. And that's why the second Beis is giving us dates. So that Beis is giving us dates, obviously, when the last ones are finished. So he asks the question, if there's later ones, they should carry on even after Chanukah and after Purim and after Pesach. What's going on? Why is there any date? He says two answers. One, that these dates, generally speaking, after that, only inferior quality would be left on the trees, the ones that people didn't like to eat. And the Beis is teaching us that even if there were even later ones, you are not allowed to rely on them. Alternatively, since the majority were gone in the majority of years, the Chazal established a time where even if you can find, you're not allowed to eat. So we've got here two separate Beises. One Beis gives us places, one Beis gives us dates. We have a steer, which one's more correct? The more gives one answer is that it's the same. Second Beis is that it's talked about when there's some unusual leftovers, but even so, those dates are the last dates you can use.
So that we mentioned that go back to the place we get from.
Yes.
So how does that fit in then?
That fits in like this. So let's say you go from Yehuda to Golil, and then you go, and then what happens is in Yehuda, let's say it's finished in Golil not, or vice versa. But you're right. If you're staying within Yehuda, then it doesn't matter when you go from one place to the next, because it's the same halacha.
I thought now we're saying the last place where they grow in.
Yeah, the last place, this is all the Rashash, all this Gemara is referring to Yehuda. But in Golil, there were other places that were finished.
Why we have a Shemitah, to make it for where in Yisroel, so why is the same thing applied anyway in Yisroel? Why is it?
That is the case. Nowadays, they will also take in consideration these halachas, but probably there's not much of the differences nowadays. It's probably very, very minimal because of the fact that nowadays harvesting occurs pretty much across the board everywhere. But you're right, that if you live in Yehuda nowadays, you have to then work out according to the end of Yehuda if you're in Golden. You said so struck him. Oh, and we had three arguments in the Beis regarding to them. One is about Gush Chalav or Tekoya. Oh, wait for you, Levi, to tell us where we know that olives are finished. Where's the last place olives grow? Who has a lot of olives? Bashi Alateo. Bashi says it twice Alateo. Yes. And another machlokes is, can you rely on the olives in the dates in the thorns? And can you rely on ahini the two paget based hini, which are very inferior quality? Okay. If you go into business, this is very, very important. Simon lahorim. If you want to know if something is a mountain, milin. If it grows on it gol not trees, then it's a raya that's a mountain. Galnot trees, galnot. That's how the article translates. It's a kind of tree. So you asked me, what are we talking about? Just go and look, open your window and see, is it a mountain? There's Gemara in Nidda, the Gemara asks a question, what color is blood? What's the Gemara answer? It's red. It says, well, how do you know? What means it possible that when Moab were killed, all the blood flowed like red? The answer is, unless we have a Torah source, can't just, you have to say, if you say, we'll see in a minute what's an Afghan halacha l'maisa, but a mountain is only if it's got millen growing on it. Similar mokim, a valley, they call him if it's got date trees. It's interesting. Where is there a lot of date trees in there? It's a song towards the valleys. Yeah, the Jordan Valley. Similar in the Cholim rivers, Cholim if reeds grow there. Oh, right. Similar in the Cholim for rivers, Cholim is reeds. Similar in the Shvela for the plains, Shikmor, sycamore trees. How do we know that sycamore trees grow in the plains? Shenema. That Shlomo Melech became very, very, very wealthy. Became so wealthy that silver became worth like nothing. And the most expensive wood became like sycamore wood. Because he was controlling the world, so the whole world had to send taxes to Eretz Yisrael. So the whole world saw it. Silver became worth like pebbles, like stones. The Savozim and cedar trees, Nosan Keshikri, made like the sycamore Ashabashveda. There was so many. So we see, what do we see? That in the plains you find a sycamore. Some of them more now. So we said 3 different simonim. If you want 4 simonim, there's 4 simonim. What are the 4 simonim? Mountains will have millet, a kind of tree. The valleys will have date trees. The rivers will have reeds, and the plains will have sycamores. Now the Gemara asks, what's an nafkuna? Similar to how in millet, so I'm not going to call him nafkuna bikurim. It's an nafkuna for bikurim. It's not. Ein mevin bikurim l'shavas aminim. The Torah says, when it talks about the mitzvah of bikurim, it says that you should bring ashatovi me'artzechem, that you should bring from your land. It doesn't say which fruit. We do shova eretz. The pasuk in Parshas, I think it's Chanun Eikev, talks about the praising. Eikev talks about the praising of Eretz Yisrael, and he says Eretz Chitov Eser Gefetino. So we learn from that the Bikurim, even though the Torah doesn't say a word about it in the Parsha of Bikurim, we do Shova Eretz to tell us that what? That Bikurim is only brought from the Shiva Saminim and nothing else. Furthermore, we learn that since the pasuk uses the word Eretz to praise Eretz Yisrael, Eretz Yisrael, it tells us the praise of Eretz Yisrael, you only bring bikurim from fruit that are praiseworthy. You do not bring inferior quality fruit. So therefore, would you bring from dates from a valley bikurim? Yes, because dates in the valley is where they're meant to go. But would you bring from dates from a mountain? No. Why? So that's what you need to know. That means like this: when you see minim growing, you know it's a mountain. And the zekla is no good, and you can't bring your bikurim from that.
Am I right?
Yes.
That's for where a lot of olives grow. Is it no?
Yes, right. Yes. Rashi says, "Tov Hashem and Raglois, story belud." Again, that's right. There and also in the Zos HaBrocha. You don't bring fruit from the valleys because in the valleys other fruit don't go so well. So dates grow in the valley, but not others. Similar to Cholim Kolim, that rivers have reeds. What do we care? Nafkimina Nachal Eson. Nachal Eson was by Egla Avufo. It was a special halach when it came to Egla Avufo that you would have to kill it. What would Egla Avufo come for? Kind of dead person, you don't know who killed him. So you take a calf and you kill it in a place which has not been worked upon. And you have to do it in a Nachal Eson. Now it's very interesting. What does Nachal Eson mean? Before you'd read this Gemara, how do you translate it? Oh, the Torah is right that Nachal Eson normally we understand it to mean a plain, a valley, a lowland. But instead over here, the Gemara seems to explain, that's what Rashi says, that Nachal Eson, you had to do it by a strong river, meaning a river that flowed well. And you have to make sure that there's reeds inside it. If there's no reeds inside it, then you can't use the Egla Avufo to go there. We'll see in a minute why we don't pass like this. If I tell you I'm selling you the plains, a field in the plains, if there's no sycamore trees there, it's a mekach tos. You can retract. Now that you come to this explanation, all these simonim is for mekach memka buying and selling. So the Rambam paskins that Nachal Eson is not a river. Nachal Eson is a valley. They ask, what do you mean? The Gemara just said Nachal, it has to have reeds, otherwise. So when the Gemara says, Hashados is lochi kulu lemekach umemke, what the Gemara is teaching us is that we're going back to the fact that nothing to do with Bikurim and everything else. We're retracting. And everything's only God in Mekach Umemke. Because if I sell you a mountain, what do I have to have on it going? Galnot trees, Gornot trees. Okay. The Mishnah, as we said, this whole pair talks about Hilchas Minhagim. So now we have another minhag. Says the Mishnah, Nun Gimel Amud Aleph towards the bottom. Mokim shenagu nimke b'modakel enochim moichim. Mokim shenagu nimke ein moichim. The Gemara Avodah Zarah tells us you're not allowed to sell cows and horses to a goy. Does anybody know why you're not allowed to sell a cow or a horse to a goy? Not kilaim, not Avodah Zarah. The strangest, work on Shabbos, so what? Let it work on Shabbos, it's not yours anymore.
No, they're not allowed to.
So once you sold it, it's not yours.
It didn't work for you. We had it in Shabbos.
The Gemara tells us two very interesting, I must admit, it's hard to digest.
Didn't we have it in Shabbos?
You had it in Shabbos, yes. Like this. Basically, one is like this. One is that you nisyoni and schirus and nisyoni. One is like this. You might come to sell it. You might come to sell it a few minutes before Shabbos. And what will happen is the guy will say to you, I want to see, give me a test run, a test drive it's called. So you'll say to the guy, of course it works. Yeah, I'll shout at the donkey, the horse, and the horse will start moving. So then the horse will start moving because of me, and it was close to Shabbos, we're working on Shabbos. So this is only testing. Another reason the Gemara says is like this, that if you start selling, you may rent out. Now, renting out is forbidden that if it works on Shabbos. So therefore, two reasons why you're not allowed to sell a horse or a cow to a goat. Now, what about sheep and goats? It's permitted. There's no halachic problem. Why? Because you can't make a sheep or goat work. There were certain places that forbade it as a minig, as a chumrah. Question is why? Rashi says the reason is because if you start selling sheep and goats, you might come to sell cows and horses. The Maram Chalava writes, this is completely new Issa because we're scared that the Goyim will use it for illicit relations, and that is forbidden because of if the illicit a michshah. The Meiri brings this Maram Chalava and he argues, he says that there's another Gemara that says that Goyim don't do it to their own animals, only to other people's animals because it ruins their ability to be reproductive organs if a person sodomizes his animal. Ma'isa, we have a machlokes exactly why it is that it was forbidden, but there were places that they did not sell sheep and goats. And if you lived in such a town, were you allowed to sell it? No. If you lived in a town that did sell it, you were allowed to. It goes after the minig of the market. Ubechol mokim, says the Mishnah. In every single place, you're not allowed to sell big animals, agolin, even young cows, which are young, they can't work. Why can't sell young cows? Because eventually they grow older to big cows. The seyochin, you're not allowed to smell small ponies, even though at the moment they can't work, because eventually they'll become big. There's shleimin or shvuin, whether they're whole or broken, even if a cow is injured, broken legs, and it's never going to work, nevertheless, you're not allowed to sell it. Rabbi Yehuda Mati b'shvur, Rabbi Yehuda permits it if it's a broken animal. Why? Or never work. Ben Beseiro Mati b'sus, Ben Beseiro allows you to sell horses, not cows, but horses, yes. Why yes to a horse? Why is a horse better than a cow? The Gemara in Shabbos, this Gemara does say in Shabbos, the primary use of a horse is horse riding. Horse riding is not awesome in HaTorah because of the fact that a living person carries himself. If you carry a child on Shabbos, you've not done Issa D'Oraisa Chai Noisas Atzmo. What about his clothes? What's the din? It's bottled to the person. So if you carry a child, you're not done Issa Chai Noisas Atzmo. So therefore, the horse primary thing is never going to be Issa D'Oraisa. Mashikin a cow was used for plowing and for carrying wagons. Therefore, a cow would be an Issa D'Oraisa. Yes, if it's an ill child, etc., very ill or sleeping. Okay. No, you're right. Chai Noisas Atzmo has got its limitations.
Yeah, but I think going down that, the slide,
Yes.
push a buggy on the head, based on the head.
Based on that, huh?
Kind is that's
Oh.
down a mall.
Yes.
Is that such neighbor? and they were allowed to push the buggy
Right.
based on the
Chanes is that, yeah.
So he
Good.
just said that if they tried to walk.
Oh. The machlokes in the post came. Do we say regarding a baby that cannot walk? Do we say chanes is that? So ben v'sim mat v'sus forbidden with a horse because a horse is mainly for riding, and riding is something which is not awesome in our Torah. Therefore, they never made this gzir. The Meiri says that the Gemara doesn't discuss this whole 3/4 of the Mishnah because since it's explained so well in Avodah Zarah, therefore it's not explained. But one line in the Mishnah is explained. Those who have a minhag to eat roasted meat on night Seder can. Those who have the minhag not to eat may not. So what's your minhag? We don't. Most people, Ashkenazim, certainly do not have roasted meat on Pesach. What? Boil it. In fact, the zvoya, which is roasted, we don't eat it Leila Seder because of the fact that we don't eat roasted meat Leila Seder. You meant it? Oh, there's a shit. Yeah. The Chayodam writes so that people throw it out. Every year I struggle, and every year I eat it.
Is it not a minhag to eat it in the afternoon on the second day?
Very good. Who said that? Ben, you said that? Yes, the Chayodam says you should eat the Zvoya second day Pesach. I told you about it, what? Yes. So what? There's a little bit of chicken. You meant to have first of all. First one, you're supposed to have on it flesh. You're supposed to have meat on it. And you're supposed to eat it. I said, and then the Rav telling me to eat it. And for about 10 years I ate it. And then one year I met him, I said to him, should I just ate it? He said to me, I've stopped the minhag. I said, why? He said to me, even though that is the halacha, but he finds it very difficult to eat because what happens is, because it's cooked on their Pesach, then it is burnt, roasted, and then you have it out in the ka'ora for 2 nights, for 4 or 5 hours, and then it's put in the fridge back and forth. So by the time comes the second day, it doesn't have the appetite for it. So I said to him, he said to me, right, that you should be doing it because Chai Adam says you should. But the fact, what?
You're
Okay.
okay. You have smelt matter.
Why?
You have smelt matter. You're okay.
Oh, what? Oh, okay. We're getting a bit ramish completely off the point. Okay, it's because you use it for mitzvah. It shouldn't be thrown in a bit. Yeah, the Beis as well. The Beis is much easier to. The Beis I eat. The Beis I eat. Yeah, but unfortunately, often it's burnt to bits. There's parts that you got. You're not allowed to say this piece of meat is for Pesach because it looks like you're makdish kodshim b'chutz. In fact, we should go right. You shouldn't say anything's for Pesach. Even if you buy paperware and if you buy your anything, you shouldn't say this is for Pesach. What should you say? It's for Yom Tov. It's for Yom Tov. You shouldn't say it's for Pesach. Why? Because people might think that you're being makdish for the Korban Pesach in order to buy Korban Pesach. There's a big machlok Rashi chases over here. What exactly is the Issa? Rashi understands that people will think that you've been makdish kedushas hadomim because they'll think that, and it's a hektish patos, but they'll think it's viol hektish. Tosfos says that they'll think that you're actually bringing it as a Korban Pesach. That means, is the question that you think that you're bringing Korban Pesach and you can't because you're not doing Korban Pesach in England? Or is it pshayt because people think you're being makdish it, and once it's kaddish, not allowed to be nana? It's big machlokes says it's pshayt Rashi, but I'm going to stick with Rashi simply because it's running out of time. Again, so Rashi says you're not. The Gemara says, "Omar Papa," as I just said again, against what I just said. Dafka basam chitiloi, the minta the pischa kama. That you're not allowed to only buy meat, but with flour, there's no problem because everybody knows that you just mean I'm guarding it for Pesach. Mishvur says that flour is slightly better because people, when you say flour for Pesach, what you mean is that I'm doing shmira for Pesach. Let's say you buy apples and you say I'm buying it for Pesach. So somebody might make the mistake of thinking you're buying the apples in order to sell them to be able to pay with the money for the Korban Pesach, which is worse. Okay, so the minhag is you just say it's for Yom Tov, you don't say for Pesach. That's very important. So what Bosaloi is meat no good mesing. Omav Yosi. Tudus is Yomi, there was a person called Tudus from Rome. He would eat roasted armored goats on Pesach. What do you mean armored goats? How can you have an armored goat? The way that you will see later, how do you roast the Korban Pesach? You would take a stick, stick it right through from its head, from its mouth, all the way to its the back passage, and put it onto the fire. And around the goat, you'd wrap the intestines and the feet. Now, that would look like a soldier who goes to war. What does he have on him? Loads of different weapons. He's got a gun, grenade, a stick, etc. So a goat, armored goat, was the way that the Korban Pesach looked like. Mekulas means armored. She says that a few places. Yes. Anyway, Mekulas means that. Okay. Maisa means armored. She says that. And therefore, let's say that's thinking that mixing up. Okay, so the Kitzur comes out that he would allow them to eat roasted armored goats on Leila Seder. To this is Yomi. Did they do it in Rome when the Beis Mikdash was standing to remind them that they're missing the Korban Pesach? Or did they do it in Rome after the Churban to remind them of the disappointment that the Beis Mikdash has been destroyed? They sent him a message. If not that, you'd be put in the Chem Shato Machlis, it's all Kotchi Bachutz. Make it clear, sleep Kotchi Bachutz. I was very happy to see Blash ask the question. And yesterday we learned that this person who walked, and when they put him in the Chem and they whipped him, because we wanted to make an example. And here for Tudus, they're all gentle. So he says that because of the fact that it wasn't yet established, it wasn't yet well known. Since it wasn't yet well known, we don't punish people. There's a difference. I know. He says a difference. He says the difference between something which is known and people, like I remember they made the rule about not speaking on the phone or something, or the beginning, the police are very out it because it's known, only it's not yet got used to it. So you have to make an example. But when something's not yet known, you can't have the same thing. Not eating kachim, it's just personal goats. Top of nun gimel amud beis. It's close to eating. Of course, not eating kachim bachutz. There was no kachim over here. Says the Mekulas and Shein Mekulas Loi. The whole problem was only because it was an armored goat, meaning it looked like a Korban Pesach. But not like our Mishnah, which says they're not even allowed to say that this is meat is for Pesach. As we know. Only Mekulas, if it's in that exact fashion, whatever you do is forbidden. Mekulas Pirush, and if you explain it, yes, Loi Pirush Lois. Our Mishnah is talking about where you don't roast it like that, but you give it the name of Pesach, it's no good. And there it's talking about where you don't give it the name of Pesach, but you roast it in that manner of the Korban Pesach. So either one by itself is no good. Either you roast it in the manner of Korban Pesach or you call it Pesach. Says the Rashi. So meaning instead of Rabbi Yossi telling us the story about Tudus Yomi, it was Rabbi Shimon said the story of Tudus Yomi. That's fine. What's not? We have a Mishnah the following halach. A korban mincha can be bought either from wheat or from barley. When is a korban mincha ever bought from barley? Does anybody know? Only 3 times is the korban mincha ever bought from barley. No, not Shavuos. What? Second day Pesach is 1. No. What? Soita and the mincha's chayta. 3 times. Okay. You bring a barley. The rest of the times it's always bought from wheat. Right? What happens if somebody says, if you give a gift of a minchas nedava can either come as the chaybo as a nedava. If you give it as a nedava, it never comes from barley. There's no such thing as a minchas nedava from barley. There's no such thing. What happens if somebody says, I'm going to give a gift to the Beis HaMikdash of mincha made out of barley? What happens? Says the Tanna Kama, they has to get mincha from wheat, because there's no such thing as mincha, a gift of barley. Comes along with Shimon and says, what does Shimon say? It's a hektish betos. It doesn't make any sense. He meant to give a gift of barley, and there is no such thing as barley. So therefore, Shimon says his potter. Let's see the words inside. Shimon it's not a normal nedava. Since it's not a normal nedava, he's potter. Says the Gemara, this person over here is certainly not doing the normal way of Korban Pesach. Either the Korban Pesach is already shechted, or he's talking about a piece of meat which is about to roast, whatever it may be, he's not doing the normal way of being makdish a Korban Pesach. If that's the case, why would Reb Shimon care? Reb Shimon is the one who holds that if you do it in an incorrect manner, what happens? You're potter. Similarly, if I say it's a piece of meat, this is a Korban Pesach, what would Reb Shimon say to me? You're saying nothing, it's meaningless. So it's a kasha. So the Gemara says that if you say that this previous price of Tudus Yomi was quoted by Reb Shimon, we have a problem. And the Gemara does not answer. And in fact, the Gemara agrees that Rabbi Shimon could never have said it. Now the Gemara asks another question. Fade the Gemara, massive law of Sheshus. Sorry, I missed out. I made a mistake. That's what we're up to. Sorry. Is Rabbi Yossi any better? We're going to learn now another halacha in Kodshim. A person is, we take in consideration his last words. There's a famous machlokes comes up a number of times in Shas. Tfos lashon rishon, tfos lashon achon. He's a Rav that I often ask questions to. And then many times where I ask the question is, I say to him, should I do A or should I do B? And he always likes to answer with this expression, either tfos lashon rishon or tfos lashon achon. This is always his favorite way of answering, especially after I have a connection to that. So the Gemara has a machlokes. Let's say a person says that this is going to be an oila, it's going to be a shlomim. Can it be both? No. Or even more problematic, he says he takes a cow which is an oila, takes another cow which is a shlomim, and he says the middle cow should be instead of this oila and instead of this shlomim. What happens now? So it's a machlokes. Do we go after tfos lashon rishon, the first statement, because then that was what he started saying? Do we go after tfos lashon achron? We go after the latter statement, because obviously the fact that he said it last is obviously the most important, because obviously he's changed minds first. Or do we take both or we ignore? That's a question which we have a few times. We had a previous argument a minute ago regarding somebody that said, I'm going to give a mincha as a gift of barley. Rabbi Shimon says you're potter. Rabbi Shimon says you're potter. If I was to ask you, Rabbi Shimon, does he hold tfos lashon rishon or tfos lashon achron? What would you say? Again, Rabbi Shimon says, if I say I'm going to give a gift of a mincha made out of barley, you don't have to give anything. Does Rabbi Shimon say tfos lashon rishon or tfos lashon achron? What do you say? Achron. So if you could all shout achron. Why? If you say it's tfos lashon rishon, I said I'm going to give a mincha present. So give a mincha present. It's only because we take the last words, which is barley, and there's no such thing of barley, that's why I'm potter. Now, who holds of that? Who's the man, the Omar that says tfos lashon achron? Who is that? Rabbi Yossi. So since Rabbi Shimon holds of Rabbi Yossi, it is logical to conclude that Rabbi Yossi holds of Rabbi Shimon. And if Rabbi Yossi holds of Rabbi Shimon, he would also agree that you don't need to give anything. And if that's the case, Rabbi Yossi, who quoted the story of Tudas Yomi, and he got all upset because the coming Korban Pesach, what does he care? It's a meaningless donation because you take a piece of meat. That's the kasha. That means again, we have a story about a Tudas Yomi that he bought meat looking like Korban Pesach. The Gemara said the story in the name of Rabbi Yossi. Then the Gemara says that somebody else said the story in the name of Rabbi Shimon. So we can't say the name of Rabbi Shimon, because according to Rabbi Shimon, Hekdesh B'Torah says nothing. And the proof being, if I say I give a mincha of barley, I give nothing. So therefore, if that's the case, what was Tudas Yomi did nothing wrong. Says the Gemara, according to Rabbi Yossi, is any better? What's the svar of Rabbi Shimon that when you promise a mincha of barley, it's nothing? It's because he holds, like Tali pointed out, tfos lashon achron, like Rabbi Yossi. If that's the case, Rabbi Yossi who holds tfos lashon achron should also hold Rabbi Shimon. And if that's the case, why was Rabbi Yossi concerned with Tudas Yomi? Says the Gemara. A person's called by his latter words. My language, Rabbi Shimon Sov Lo Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yossi Lami Sov Lo Rabbi Shimon. Says, well, no, right. Rabbi Shimon Sov Lo Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yossi Sov Lo Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon indeed has told of Rabbi Yossi, otherwise it wouldn't make any sense that he says you're potter. The only reason he says you're potter is because since you said I'm going to give a mincha, and it's made out of barley, and since we take the latter words to be most important, and the latter words is barley, and there's no such thing as a gift of barley, you're potter. But not necessarily does it follow that Beis holds from Shimon. Could be Rabbi Yossi agrees tfos lashon achron, but he says you still have to give something. Why? Because even though it's hekdesh b'Torah, because there's no such thing, he holds that when you say something, if at the end of the sentence nothing comes out of it, this is how the Rishonim explain it, then we come back to the conclusion that you obviously must said something. If according to Rabbi Yossi, if I say I'm going to give a gift of a mincha of barley, Rabbi Yossi says you go after the latter words. There's no such thing as a gift of barley. So therefore, what do I have to do? Give a mincha according to Rabbi Yossi. Shimon says give nothing. Rabbi Yossi says, since if the latter means nothing, we force to give something. And that's why he was upset with Tudus, because the way he was doing it would cause people to say to themselves, this is a Korban Pesach. And even though it's hekdesh b'Torah, because it's already dead, slaughtered, and roasted, they would somehow have to be forced to say something, and therefore that's why I was doing it. Okay. Now the Gemara told us that Tudus did a terrible, terrible thing. What was the terrible thing he did? He told people to roast the Korban Pesach to roast their own Yom Tov meat in the same manner as the Korban Pesach. And what were they going to do to him? Put him in Chayim. They didn't. Why didn't they put him in Chayim? Let's read the words of the Gemara inside. Ilmole tudus ata. If not for the fact that you're the great tudus, because the Gemara is go like this. Tudus is Shreimi Gavarabba Hava. Was he a great person? Because he was a great person, therefore they didn't want to do something bad to him. Or by a great from Hava was just a person with very strong fists, meaning he was a mafia. I mean, is the reason they did not put him in Chayim was out of honor or out of fear? Says the Gemara, come to the minute what's nafkin, we're going to Toshima. Oidzu Toash to the Sishroimis, Mamish Ashkocha Pfotis, that this is a word, and I can't tell you how many Mephoshim in this week's Parsha discuss this Gemara. Says to the amazing Gemara, which is quoted so many times. Ma Toash to the Sishroimi, he dashed in the following drasha. Ma Vochanan Mishov Azar Shmos Ask Kedusha Hashem. We all know the story. The Vochanetza set up a whole major monument. What do you call it? Not monument, not arch. The Chanetza set up not an idol. You would call it like an idol. Monument. There's a better word for statue. Set up a huge statue, and they got themselves thrown in the fire. They killed Shnesh. Why would they throw themselves into a fire? Rashi says the question was, what about the Chayim? You're not allowed to die. You're not allowed to die for no reason. Not to kavachim bats, but made the kavachim mitzvadim from the frogs. There's no mitzvah for a frog to do Kiddush Hashem. They came into your ovens. What's the translation of Mishawei Secho? And your doughs. Your dough. Amos had Mishawei with Suicide Sultana. When is the dough in the oven? When the oven is hot. So therefore they jumped into the doughs when it was in the oven. And obviously what would happen to them? They would die. Therefore we have to die. Oh, the amount of questions on this Gemara, showing 10 different questions. Oh no, what's going on? Tis asks a few. What do you mean? They have to learn from the frogs. The frogs is a mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem. And second of all, the frogs, you can't learn from the frogs. Why? A frog doesn't have a mitzvah of a chai pohem. Since it doesn't have a mitzvah of a chai pohem, so obviously it's allowed to die. But the Yid's got a mitzvah of a chai pohem, so maybe you should learn from the frogs. And so forth. Another question Mashor asks, is the frogs, they were told, Hashem said to the frogs, go into the ovens. So he says a very nice, beautiful answer for that. What's the answer? Because the frogs were told to go into the beds, into the ovens, etc. Each frog could have said to the other one, I'll go to the bed, you go into the oven. The fact that some of them went into the oven shows their greatness. Baby, here we have a very famous thesis. We have to do the thesis inside. Okay, we'll do it outside. Thesis asks the question, what's going on? It's a mitzvah. Thesis has two famous answers. One is that it wasn't Avodah Zarah, it was just a monument, and it was just a matter of showing the Vochanetza that even though it looked like it wasn't nothing to do with Avodah Zarah, but people might have thought maybe to do Avodah Zarah, that's why they did it. And another answer to this is that there was a much easier option. The Apostle in Yecheskel tells it, in Yecheskel of all places. Hanani, Mishov, Azariah were offered, not in Daniel, it tells them offered that they could have run away. They didn't need to go. They went to the event and didn't bow down. That was the great news. And that they learned from the frogs, that you got an opportunity to do Kiddush Hashem, you go and do it. Now there's a Rambam that writes that, the Torah says, from here we see, that if you want to die Kiddush Hashem, you can. Let's for example, a guy would say to you, eat a piece of chazor, I'll kill you. You're allowed to die rather, even though it's not one of the three, you're allowed to be machmir on yourself. Rambam holds you're not allowed to. Rambam says that a tzaddik, or sometimes when it's a very important event, you are allowed to. Oh, so that's another question. Over here was b'fehesia. So the Mashal says it wasn't b'fehesia, there were no Yidden, they were only going. They ask on the Mashal, the Chizkiach asks that it's not true. If the Yidden eventually find out, that's also called b'fehesia. It's a shame we haven't got so much time. But this is a very interesting question that they learned. But it's very interesting that there's a Medrash in Shir Hashim that clearly says that Yecheskel said to them, Chavum k'mat ad yavu zam. It's a pasuk. Hide for a moment, and then everything will pass. And they said to Yecheskel, no. And that's Yecheskel, will we die if we get thrown in the fire? And Yecheskel said, yes, you will die. And they said to him, nevertheless, it's better for us to go. And as they left, says the Medrash, Hashem said to Yecheskel, they won't die. But I don't want to tell it to you a minute ago, because I want them to go in with the knowledge that they're going to die. It's very interesting. There's a lot to learn from it. You see, I like this Mashal that each fog says, and the Dash Moshe brings a medrash. It's another medrash, and I just saw it in Dash Moshe. It's brought down in a few places. The medrash says that the frogs that jumped in the fire, they never died. All the other frogs died except for the frogs that jumped into the fire. And he points out, if you look at the pasuk, it's almost clear in the pasuk. The pasuk says, go into the ovens and everything else. But when it talks about them dying, what does it say? It says they will all die, the ones from the beds, from the houses. It doesn't say from the ovens. The ones from the ovens, it doesn't say anything about them dying. The ones from the ovens never died. When the person's Moisar Kiddush Hashem, he only succeeds. Chaim Kaufman said, you see the same idea. He brings it to what? No, the pasuk doesn't say. Look at the pasuk. You'll see the pasuk. They never died. When you're Moisar Nefesh, whatever you give up for Hashem, you lose nothing out of it. Oh, it's a very, very interesting Gemara. It's a fascinating Gemara. Rabbi Yossi Ba'ov in Omar, you look at Chaim Kaufman Hashem, he also brings this medrash down. Rabbi Yossi Ba'ov in Omar, Matel Belai Lekishta B'Dechomim. He supported Tabei Chachamim. He helped them do business. Some do is in the shadow of money to support the Chacham will be in the shadow of Torah. It's very interesting as we see over here the Chashivus of Tudas now. Yisroel says like this: the Gemara asked the Shaila, why did they not put him in the Chem? Was it because he was a dangerous man, or was it because he was a great man? It says the Gemara is trying to teach you that because he supported the Chachamim, therefore he didn't suffer. Because just like Torah, the Gemara says in Brachas Magdol Mats to protect people from all troubles, supported Torah to protect people from all troubles. And he brings smachs v'ulum b'tzeisecha. Normally, when a person goes into business, he's not happy on the way out because he doesn't know if he'll make any money. On the way home, when he's made money, then he gets happy. But if he goes to earn money in order to support the Chachamim, then as he's leaving, he's happy because he knows already he's going straight into Gan Eden. And it doesn't necessarily just support it to be the Chachamim. It can also mean that if a person goes to work in order to pay for his children's fees. Because at the end of the day, he wants the children to learn Torah. A person can never underestimate us. Look in which fashion Yoder Chelik Dalet. It's got a whole tshuva about the tremendous chusim that a person gets, unbelievable chusim. Now it brings this gemara, Matim Malay Lekista B'Dei Chachamim. That when a person helps either his own children or others learn Torah with his money, it's a huge chus. Okay, next Mishnah. Some people had a minhag dafka to light a candle in Kippur. Some people had a minhag not to light. The more explained both minhagim. Either way, we would light batik in the serious spots with drushes. You'd light in the shuls and base medrash. When voice are failing and in dark alleyways, because and by people not well. Tana. The more explains like this. There's a issa in Yom Kippur. One of the 5 inuim is issa tashvish hamita. Because of this Inui, they wanted to make a gezerah. Wasn't a Darabanan, it was almost like a Darabanan, that people would make sure that what's the best way? Some felt the best way is to keep the lights off. If there's no, in those days, there's no electricity. So if you had no candles on, you wouldn't see your wife. You wouldn't see your wife, you won't come to do Tashmish Shemitah. Others felt on the contrary. If you put a light on, the halach is not allowed to Tashmish Shemitah in the light. So by having a light on, that way you'll make sure to Tashmish Shemitah. So both of them were trying to get to the same reason, but each in a different way. Mishnah brings it all down. It says, well, they're both intended for the same thing, i.e., to avoid Tashmish Shemitah. What does it mean everybody is a tzaddik? Everybody is a tzaddik. Those who lit with tzaddikim because they were trying to avoid it this way. Those who tzaddik because of the other way. This way, they're all tzaddikim because they all want to serve Hashem. And it's an important message. Some people want to serve Hashem by learning more Torah, some might do more chesed. Everybody's got their way. Amich kolom tzaddikim. Omar Yehuda Mashmol. If you vochad al oil b'motzei Shabbos, you don't make a bracha on the fire only motzei Shabbos. So there's a tis over here which is brought down in I can't tell how many places, and it's brought down in Tis Rosh even more geschmack. He asks the question like this: if you ever had a hot bath and you're sitting luxuriating, you ask the Tis Rosh, why did you make a bracha? What do you get more pleasure from, a hot bath or a drink of cold water? Much more geschmack from a hot water. Why did you make a bracha on a hot bath? Okay, so sunbathing then. He says the answer is you only make a bracha on that which your body absorbs. So if that's the case, so why make a bracha on fire? Okay, why make a bracha on fire? It says fire. It's not brichas hanenin, it's brichas hashvach. It's praising Hashem. Okay. Nice, it's a very interesting disrosh that you ask the kasha. It's brought down in all places because there's other things. For example, let's say they ask the question: somebody wants to smoke. Why don't we keep on smoking? Or somebody with something we do because it imbibe the smell. Okay, here. Fire was created Motzei Shabbos. You're correct. So to Abiyachan said. Now we're going to go through the next more big fast. You have to get it clear in your minds. Ula was riding on a donkey, and he was going by the shock of He had two great Amorim. Rab Abba on his right, Rabba on his left. So Ula in the middle, Rab Abba on his right, Rabba on his left. That the only time you make a bracha on fire is Motzei Shabbos because that's when fire was created. So again, who said this? Rab Abba on the right of Ula said to Ula, is it true you don't make a bracha Motzei Shabbos? What he was trying to exclude was Motzei Yom Kippur. That you don't make a bracha Motzei Yom Kippur. Only Motzei Shabbos, because that's when it was created. Motzei Yom Kippur wasn't created. Ula, who was in the middle, turned to the other one and looked at him irritated. Why? What's going on? One person said to him, is it true that you don't make a bracha Motzei Yom Kippur? And he looked irritated at the other person. Why? So the answer is, we'll see in the Gemara that he worked out in his own mind that the only person that could have misquoted him was Rabbi Baba Chana, not Abba. So he said like this: Omali, I know I never said anything of the sort. The Tali Tali Kaved Rabbi Yechon Mishun Olazayim. You Kavod Shcholis B'Shabbos. What happens if Yom Kippur is on Shabbos? On Yom Shabbos, there's a mitzvah to light Shabbos candles. On Yom Kippur, there are those who have a minhag not to light the candle in order to avoid Tasha Shemitah. What did you do if Yom Kippur is on Shabbos? So Shimon Rosa says, you have to light. But on the Chachamim say you mustn't light because the minhag of Yom Kippur trumps over the Shabbos. That's what I meant. That's all that I said. Of course, you make a bracha Motzei Yom Kippur. But the reason why I was saying is that you don't light on Yom Kippur a candle, even if it's Shabbos. Ula understood from his heart what had gone wrong. They had been misquoted by the other person, and he never revealed. The great person can draw out the water. It's Rabbi Baba Chana, and that is Rabbi Baba Chana who worked out from his own mind why was Ula upset. So we've got over here. We're going to carry on from tomorrow's Mamish in middle, the third line from Nudad and Nudalef. We've got to Machloikas. Do you make a bracha by Mereish only Motzei Shabbos or also Motzei Yom Kippur? What do we do? Very good. Motzei Yom Kippur as well. Oh, only Neish Shavas. You're already jumping the gun, but that's correct. Very good.
Square.
Right. Square. That's Susan. Yes.